Welcome to tonight's mystery. We descend not into fog-shrouded moors or glittering ballrooms, but into the stark corridors of justice itself, where a man awaits the hangman's noose, yet cries out that he is innocent. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, receives the most peculiar of cases. A convicted murderer who confessed to his crime, was tried and sentenced to death, yet now begs for help, claiming his own confession was a lie. Join us for The Killer's Confession, a tale of guilt, manipulation, and the terrible weight of words once spoken. Crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this enigma unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Summons. The November rain struck the windows of our sitting room at 14 Faraway Street with a persistence that bordered on malice. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat by the fire, nursing a cup of tea that had long since gone cold, watching my friend Hercule Poirot as he performed his morning ritual. It was a ritual I had witnessed countless times, yet it never failed to fascinate me. Poirot sat at his desk, arranging his correspondence into 3 precise piles: the left for matters requiring immediate attention, the center for items of moderate interest, and the right for what he termed the tedious necessities of existence: bills, circulars, and invitations to events he had no intention of attending. His egg-shaped head, impeccably groomed as always, tilted slightly as he examined each envelope. The waxed points of his magnificent mustache caught the lamplight, and I noted with some amusement that he had positioned himself exactly equidistant from both the window and the fire, a geometric precision that would have seemed absurd in any other man. "You are staring, Hastings," he said without looking up. "It is most disconcerting." "My apologies," I said, though I wasn't particularly sorry. "Quiet morning?" "Regrettably so. 3 requests for my services, yet all of them—" He made a dismissive gesture with one manicured hand. "Pedestrian. A missing necklace that will be found in the lady's other jewelry box, a suspected embezzlement that is merely incompetent bookkeeping, and a gentleman who believes his wife is poisoning him when in truth she has simply stopped adding sugar to his coffee." "You can determine all that from letters alone?" Poirot permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. "The little grey cells, my friend. They observe what others overlook. The necklace lady writes on paper from the Savoy, yet claims poverty. The embezzlement gentleman's handwriting shows no anxiety, merely confusion. And the poisoning husband has included a sample menu of his meals, which reveals his wife has placed him on a diet. The bitterness he tastes is the absence of sweetness, nothing more." I shook my head in admiration. After years at Poirot's side, I still found myself marveling at his deductive capabilities. "So, nothing of interest then?" "Nothing that requires the attention of Hercule Poirot." He set down the final envelope and reached for his tisane. "It is a curious thing, Hastings. The criminals of England appear to have taken a holiday. Perhaps they read of my involvement in the Hartington affair and have wisely decided to pursue honest employment." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang with unusual urgency, 3 sharp peals in quick succession. Moments later, our landlady, Mrs. Pearson, appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "A messenger, Mr. Poirot, from the Home Office," he says, most insistent. Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "The Home Office? How intriguing. Show him in, if you please." The young man who entered was drenched despite his mackintosh, water dripping onto Mrs. Pearson's clean floor, a transgression that caused Poirot visible discomfort. The messenger clutched a leather satchel to his chest, as though it contained the crown jewels. "Mr. Winch? Hercule Poirot?" he asked breathlessly. "I am he." The young man fumbled with the satchel's clasp. "Priority dispatch, sir, from Sir Geoffrey Blackwell at the Home Office. He said you'd understand the urgency once you read it." He produced a thick envelope bearing an official seal, which Poirot accepted with the delicacy one might reserve for a suspect explosive device. The messenger departed as quickly as he had arrived, leaving wet footprints and an atmosphere of tension in his wake. Poirot examined the seal with interest. "Sir Geoffrey Blackwell? I have not had dealings with him for some years, not since the Albemarle business. You recall it, Hastings? The diplomatic affair?" Vaguely. Poirot broke the seal and withdrew several pages. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to something I could not quite identify, a deepening gravity that settled over his features like a shadow. "What is it?" I asked, unable to contain my impatience. Poirot did not answer immediately. He read through the pages once, then again, his fingers absently smoothing his moustache. When at last he looked up, his dark eyes held an unusual intensity. "Tell me, Hastings, what do you know of the Ashworth murder?" I searched my memory. Ashworth. Sir Roland Ashworth? The industrialist? I recall reading about it in the papers some months ago. Strangled in his study, wasn't he? They caught the fellow who did it. His secretary, I believe. Open and shut case. The man confessed. Indeed he did. Poirot set down the papers and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. Thomas Harding, aged 32, formerly secretary to Sir Roland Ashworth for 7 years. On the night of May 14th, Sir Roland was found dead in his study at Thornwood House, strangled with a length of curtain cord. Harding was discovered in the garden, blood on his cuffs, the cord's twin in his pocket. When confronted by the police, he confessed immediately and in great detail. Then, what's the difficulty? Sounds straightforward enough. That is precisely the difficulty, mon ami. It was too straightforward. Poirot tapped the papers before him. Thomas Harding was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. His execution is scheduled for... He glanced at the documents. 12 days from now. And yet, 3 days ago, he wrote a letter to the Home Office, recanting his confession entirely. I felt my eyebrows climb toward my hairline. Recanting? After all this time? Surely that's common enough. Condemned men grasping at straws. So one would assume. However, Harding's letter contains certain details that have given Sir Geoffrey pause. Poirot lifted one of the pages. He writes, and I quote, "I confess to a crime I did not commit. I was made to confess, made to believe I had no choice, but I did not kill Sir Roland Ashworth. I could not have killed him, for I did not know how he died until the police told me. Everything I said, I was taught to say. The real killer walks free, and I go to my death protecting someone who used me as a pawn." The words hung in the air between us. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows with renewed fury. "Made to confess?" I repeated. "What does he mean by that?" "That is what Sir Geoffrey wishes me to discover." Poirot rose from his chair with surprising energy. His earlier languor entirely vanished. "The Home Secretary is reluctant to halt an execution based solely on the desperate claims of a condemned man. However, certain elements of Harding's original confession have always troubled those who examined the case closely. Small inconsistencies, details that did not quite align with the evidence. Such as? Such as the fact that Harding confessed to strangling Sir Roland from behind, yet the bruising pattern suggested a frontal attack. Such as his claim that he used the curtain cord from the study window when forensic examination determined the murder weapon came from the library. Such as his assertion that he killed Sir Roland at 10 o'clock when the medical evidence suggested death occurred closer to midnight. I frowned. But if there were all these discrepancies, why was he convicted? Because, Hastings, he confessed. In the eyes of the jury, nothing outweighs a man's own admission of guilt. The discrepancies were explained away as confusion, as the natural errors of a man in shock after committing violence. Harding himself, when questioned about the inconsistencies, simply repeated his confession word for word, as though reciting from memory. "As though reciting from memory," I echoed. "You mean—" "I mean, mon ami, that I believe Thomas Harding may have been telling the truth in that letter. Not the whole truth. He is still protecting someone, that much is clear. But the truth nonetheless." Poirot moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-lashed street. "A man who commits murder knows how he committed it. The details are seared into his consciousness. But a man who confesses to a murder he did not commit, he must rely on what he has been told. And if he is told incorrectly, then his confession won't match the evidence. Précisément. Poirot turned back to face me, and I saw that peculiar light in his eyes, the gleam of the hunter who has caught the scent. Sir Geoffrey has requested that I investigate privately and discreetly. The official position remains that Harding is guilty, but if I can uncover evidence of his innocence before the execution date— 12 days, I said. That's not much time. No, it is not, which is why we must begin immediately. He retrieved his overcoat from the stand, brushing an invisible speck from its immaculate surface. Come, Hastings. We have an appointment to keep. An appointment? With whom? With a killer, my friend. Poirot smiled grimly. Or rather, with a man who claims he is not one. We go to Pentonville Prison to hear Thomas Harding's story from his own lips. I rose hastily, reaching for my own coat. You believe him, then? You believe he's innocent? Poirot paused at the door, one hand on the frame. His expression grew thoughtful, almost melancholy. I believe, Hastings, that the truth is never as simple as we wish it to be. Thomas Harding confessed to murder. That much is fact. But confession and guilt are not always the same thing. A man may confess to protect another. He may confess out of fear, or confusion, or manipulation. He may confess because he has been made to believe he has no other choice. And which do you think applies to Harding? That, Poirot said quietly, is what the little grey cells must determine. But I will tell you this much. Whoever truly killed Sir Roland Ashworth is clever. Clever enough to make another man take the blame. Clever enough to construct a confession that seemed irrefutable. Such a person does not act on impulse. They plan, they manipulate, they control. And they believed they had succeeded. He opened the door, and the sounds of the rain-swept street rushed in to meet us. But they did not account for one thing, Poirot continued, his voice hardening with quiet determination. They did not account for Hercule Poirot, and now, with 12 days remaining, we shall see whether justice can still be served, or whether an innocent man will hang for a crime he did not commit. As I followed him out into the grey November morning, I felt the familiar thrill of the chase beginning to stir in my blood. We had pursued murderers through manor houses and aboard speeding trains, through the glittering salons of high society and the humble cottages of country villages. But this case was different. This time, the killer had already won. Or so they believed. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in London, a guilty party walked free while an innocent man counted his final days. It was, I reflected as we hailed a cab for Pentonville, exactly the sort of impossible challenge that brought out the very best in my remarkable friend. Chapter 2. The Condemned Man. Pentonville Prison rose before us like a monument to human despair. Its grey stone walls, darkened by decades of London soot, seemed to absorb what little light the overcast sky offered. As our cab drew to a halt before the main gate, I felt an involuntary shiver pass through me, and not merely from the cold. Cheerful place, I muttered. It is not designed for cheer, Hastings. Poirot stepped down onto the wet pavement, his patent leather shoes reflecting the puddles with an incongruity that seemed almost defiant. It is designed to contain, to punish, and, in some cases, to prepare men for death. The formalities of entry took some time. Despite Sir Geoffrey's letter of authorization, the prison governor, a stern, grey-whiskered man named Caldwell, regarded us with undisguised suspicion. I must say, "This is highly irregular," he said, leading us through a series of locked gates and echoing corridors. "Harding has had his trial. He confessed. The appeals have been exhausted. I don't see what good can come of raking through it all again." "Perhaps none," Poirot agreed mildly. "But the Home Office wishes to be certain. You understand, Governor, in matters of life and death, certainty is paramount." Caldwell grunted. "The man's guilty as sin. I've seen enough killers in my time to know the look. Harding has it, that hollow stare, like something's gone out behind the eyes. And yet he now claims innocence. They all do, eventually. When the noose gets close enough, even the hardest men start grasping at straws. Caldwell stopped before a heavy iron door. He's in the condemned cell. You'll have 30 minutes, no more. Guard will be present throughout. The door groaned open, revealing a small, sparse room lit by a single barred window set high in the wall. The cell contained a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a table with a Bible upon it, and a man. Thomas Harding rose as we entered. He was younger than I had expected, early 30s, with the pale, gaunt look of one who has not seen proper sunlight in months. His brown hair had been cropped close, and his prison uniform hung loose on a frame that had clearly once been more robust. But it was his eyes that arrested me, large, dark, and filled with an emotion I could not immediately identify. Not guilt, I realized. Not fear, though surely fear must be present in a man 12 days from the gallows. No, what I saw in Thomas Harding's eyes was something closer to relief. "Mr. Poirot," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. "You came. I wasn't sure you would. You wrote to the Home Office, Monsieur Harding. When such letters reach the desk of Hercule Poirot, I do not ignore them." Poirot settled himself on the wooden chair with as much dignity as if it were a velvet armchair in a Mayfair drawing room. "Please sit. We have much to discuss, and little time in which to discuss it." Harding sank onto the edge of his bed, his hands clasped between his knees. The guard, a burly, impassive man, positioned himself by the door, close enough to intervene, but far enough to offer the illusion of privacy. "I know what you must think," Harding began. "Another condemned man claiming innocence at the 11th hour? I wouldn't believe me either, in your position. I have not yet decided what I believe, monsieur. That is why I am here, to listen, to observe, and to allow the little grey cells to form their own conclusions." Poirot's dark eyes fixed upon Harding with an intensity that seemed to pin the younger man in place. "Tell me everything, from the beginning, and I caution you, I will know if you lie." Harding swallowed hard. "Where should I begin?" "With Sir Roland Ashworth. You were his secretary for 7 years, yes? Tell me about him." "Sir Roland was—" Harding paused, searching for words. "He was a complicated man, brilliant in business. Built his fortune from nothing, they say, but cold, demanding. He expected perfection from everyone around him, and he had no patience for failure." "You disliked him?" "I respected him, at first." Harding's gaze dropped to the floor. "But over the years, I came to see what he truly was. He treated people as tools, useful while they served his purposes, discarded when they didn't. His wife, his daughter, his staff, we were all just pieces on his chessboard. And yet you remained in his employ for 7 years. I had my reasons." Something flickered in Harding's eyes, a shadow that passed too quickly for me to interpret. "Good wages, a position of trust, and I had nowhere else to go." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching almost imperceptibly. "Continue. The night of May 14th. What do you remember?" Harding's hands tightened on his knees. "That's just it, Mr. Poirot. I don't remember. Not clearly. I've tried and tried, but it's all fragments. I know I was at Thornwood House that evening. I know I had been drinking. Sir Roland had guests for dinner, and the staff was permitted sherry afterward. But after perhaps 9 o'clock, he shook his head. It's like looking through frosted glass, shapes and sounds, but nothing I can hold on to." "You remember nothing of the murder itself?" "Nothing." The word emerged as barely more than a whisper. I woke in the garden, on the grass near the servants' entrance. My head was pounding. My hands were— He looked down at his own palms as though seeing them for the first time. There was blood on my cuffs, and that cord, the curtain cord, was in my pocket. I don't know how it got there. I glanced at Poirot, who remained perfectly still, his expression unreadable. "And then the police arrived," Poirot said quietly. "Yes, I was confused, frightened. Inspector Graves began questioning me, and I couldn't explain. How could I explain waking up covered in evidence of a crime I couldn't remember committing?" Harding's voice grew strained. "And then someone came to me, took me aside while the inspector was occupied elsewhere." "Someone?" Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Who?" For the first time, Harding hesitated. His eyes darted toward the guard by the door, then back to Poirot. "I can't say." "Monsieur Harding." Poirot's voice carried a gentle but unmistakable steel. "You wrote to the Home Office claiming your confession was false, that you were made to confess. If you wish me to save your life, you must tell me who made you." "I can't." Anguish twisted Harding's features. "Don't you understand? If I tell you, if I give you the name, then everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, will be for nothing. They'll be destroyed." "I won't let that happen. I can't." "Even at the cost of your own life?" "Even then." A heavy silence fell over the cell. The rain had intensified outside. I could hear it drumming against the high window, a relentless rhythm that seemed to count down the seconds of a dying man's life. "Then let us approach this differently," Poirot said at last, his tone thoughtful. "You say you were taken aside while Inspector Graves was occupied. Tell me what happened next, without naming the person who spoke to you." Harding drew a shaky breath. They told me that the evidence was overwhelming. My blood on Sir Roland's collar, the cord in my pocket. I had been seen arguing with Sir Roland that afternoon. Everyone knew we'd had words. They said there was no possibility of acquittal. I would hang regardless of what I said. And they said... Harding closed his eyes. They said that if I confessed, if I took responsibility, it would be quick, merciful. But if I fought, if I protested my innocence, then things would go badly. For me, yes, but also for people I cared about. Evidence would emerge. Scandals would be exposed. Lives would be ruined. "Blackmail," I said, unable to contain myself. "This person blackmailed you into confessing?" Harding's eyes opened, meeting mine with a desperate intensity. "Not blackmail, not the way you mean. They weren't trying to hurt me, Captain Hastings. They were trying to protect someone else. And His voice broke. "I loved that person more than my own life. I still do. So I agreed. I confessed. I repeated every word they taught me, just as they told me to say it." "The details of the confession," Poirot said slowly. "The method, the weapon, the timing, all of it was given to you by this person?" "Yes." "And you did not question why the details were incorrect? Why your confession would not match the evidence?" Harding shook his head miserably. "I didn't know they were incorrect. I had no idea how Sir Roland had actually died. I assumed they knew what they were talking about. It wasn't until the trial, when the forensic evidence was presented, that I realized..." He trailed off. By then, it was too late. I had already confessed in writing and before witnesses. Retracting would only make things worse. Poirot rose from his chair and paced the small cell. 3 steps one direction, 3 steps back. His fingers drummed against his thigh, a rare sign of agitation. "You realize, Monsieur Harding, what this implies? If your confession was dictated to you with incorrect details, then the person who dictated it did not witness the murder. They could not have been the killer, or they would have known the true method." Harding stared at him. I hadn't thought of it that way. "But consider further." Poirot stopped, turning to face the condemned man. "If this person was not the killer, then why did they wish you to confess? What purpose did it serve? To protect whom, precisely? You have said you were protecting someone you loved. But think, monsieur, if that person was not the killer, why did they need protection from a murder investigation?" The color drained from Harding's already pale face. I could see him struggling with something, a realization he did not want to face. "Unless," he whispered. "Unless they believed..." "Yes?" Poirot's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "What did they believe?" "They believed I had done it." The words seemed to tear themselves from Harding's throat. My God, they thought I was the murderer. The blood on my clothes, the cord in my pocket. They found me there, and they thought I had killed him. They convinced me to confess because they thought they were protecting me. From what? From a messy trial. From having my secrets exposed. They said a quick confession would spare everyone the scandal, spare me the worst of it. Harding pressed his hands to his temples. But I didn't do it. I couldn't have done it. I was unconscious in that garden. Someone put me there. Someone planted that evidence on me. And this person who convinced you to confess, Poirot said quietly, they did not know that. They believed genuinely that they were helping you, did they not? Harding nodded, his eyes glistening. Yes. They thought they were saving me from myself. They didn't know I was innocent. They still don't. Poirot stood motionless for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small notebook and pencil, which he placed on the table before Harding. I'm going to ask you one question, monsieur, and I ask that you write your answer rather than speak it aloud. The guard need not see. This is between us. Harding looked at the notebook, then at Poirot. What question? The person who convinced you to confess. The one you love, the one you were protecting. Write their name. I told you, I can't. You must. Poirot's voice carried an authority that silenced all protest. If you wish to live, if you wish the truth to be known, you must trust Hercule Poirot. Write the name. I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to protect this person from scandal, but I cannot help you unless I know who they are. The condemned man stared at Poirot for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he reached for the pencil. He wrote a single name and pushed the notebook toward Poirot. I watched as my friend read the name. His expression did not change, not exactly, but something in his eyes shifted. A shadow of understanding, perhaps. Or recognition. Ah, Poirot murmured. Yes, now I begin to see. He pocketed the notebook without showing it to me, and when I opened my mouth to ask, a single glance from those sharp dark eyes silenced me. Monsieur Harding, Poirot said, retrieving his hat from the table, I will do what I can, but I must ask you, is there anything else, any detail, however small, that you have not told me? Harding hesitated. There is one thing. That night, before the sherry, before everything went dark, I saw something. Someone in the corridor near Sir Roland's study who shouldn't have been there. Who? The doctor, Dr. Reginald Marsh. He's the family physician, has been for years. But he wasn't expected that evening. There was no appointment. He was coming out of the study looking agitated. He saw me and hurried away without a word. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, monsieur. You have given me much to consider. As we left the cell, the iron door clanging shut behind us, I could contain my curiosity no longer. Poirot, the name, who was it? Who convinced him to confess? Poirot did not break stride. Patience, Hastings. All will be revealed in time. But I will say only this. We are dealing with a crime of remarkable complexity. A murderer clever enough to frame an innocent man. A confession manufactured from falsehoods. And now a web of love and loyalty that has trapped Thomas Harding as surely as these prison walls. We emerged into the grey light of the courtyard, where rain continued to fall in sheets. And the doctor? I pressed. Dr. Marsh, do you think he's involved? I think, mon ami, that we must visit Thornwood House with all possible haste. Poirot raised his umbrella against the rain, his expression grim. For somewhere in that household lies a killer who believed their crime was perfect. And in 12 days, an innocent man will die unless we can prove otherwise. He hailed a passing cab with a sharp gesture. Come, Hastings. The game, as they say, is afoot. Chapter 3. The Scene of the Crime. Thornwood House stood at the end of a long, winding drive, its Georgian facade rising with stern dignity from grounds that had surely been magnificent in summer, but now lay dormant beneath the November grey. Ancient oaks lined the approach, their bare branches reaching toward the overcast sky like skeletal fingers. Charming, I remarked as our cab crunched along the gravel. You find it so? Poirot peered through the rain-spattered window with evident distaste. I find it damp, isolated, and altogether too English for comfort. A house where secrets fester, Hastings. One can feel it in the very stones. The cab deposited us at the front entrance, where a butler of advanced years and impeccable bearing awaited. His name, we learned, was Fenwick, and he had served the Ashworth family for over 30 years. "Lady Ashworth is expecting you, sir," he said, leading us through a grand entrance hall adorned with portraits and hunting trophies. Sir Geoffrey Blackwell's office telephoned ahead. I must say, this has caused considerable distress in the household. "Murder generally does," Poirot observed mildly. Fenwick's thin lips pressed together. "The matter was considered closed, sir. Mr. Harding confessed. Justice was served. To reopen old wounds now seems unnecessarily cruel. And yet, Fenwick, if an innocent man were to hang, that too would be cruel, would it not?" The butler did not reply. He showed us into a drawing room where a fire crackled in the hearth, then withdrew with a murmured promise that Lady Ashworth would join us presently. The room was elegantly appointed, silk wallpaper in muted green, furniture of obvious quality, a grand piano in one corner. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of a man in his 60s, stern-faced and commanding, with cold grey eyes that seemed to follow one about the room. "Sir Roland, I presume," I said. "Indeed, a formidable presence, even in oil and canvas." Poirot studied the portrait with interest. "Note the set of the jaw, Hastings, the rigidity of the posture. This was a man accustomed to obedience, uncomfortable with opposition. Harding mentioned he was cold, demanding. Yes, and such men often inspire strong emotions in those around them. Love, hate, fear." Poirot's voice dropped. "And sometimes the desperate need to escape." The drawing-room door opened, and a woman entered. Lady Ashworth was perhaps 50, handsome rather than beautiful, with the kind of bone structure that would age gracefully. She wore a dress of deep purple, half mourning, I noted, and her silver-streaked dark hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement. But it was her eyes that drew my attention. Grey like her late husband's, yet somehow warmer, touched with a weariness that spoke of long suffering. "Mr. Poirot," she said, extending her hand, "I received Sir Geoffrey's message. I confess I am surprised by this development." "Madame," Poirot bowed over her hand with continental courtesy, "I appreciate your willingness to receive us. I understand this must be difficult." "Difficult?" A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "Mr. Poirot, my husband was murdered 6 months ago. His secretary, a man I trusted, confessed to the crime. I have spent half a year trying to piece my life back together. And now, you tell me the confession may have been false?" She sank into an armchair by the fire, her composure intact but clearly strained. "Yes, I would call that difficult." "Then let us proceed with all possible delicacy." Poirot seated himself opposite her, while I took a position by the window where I could observe both the conversation and the grounds beyond. "May I ask, Lady Ashworth, what you remember of the night your husband died?" Lady Ashworth folded her hands in her lap. "It was a dinner party, 8 guests in all, business associates of Roland's mostly, tedious affairs, but Roland insisted upon them. The evening proceeded as usual, drinks at 7, dinner at 8, brandy and cigars for the gentlemen afterward, while the ladies retired to this very room." "And Sir Roland?" "He excused himself around 9:30, said he had correspondence to attend to in his study. That was the last time I saw him alive." Her voice caught slightly, but she recovered quickly. "The guests departed by 11. I went to bed. The next morning, Fenwick found Roland in his study, dead." "Strangled," Poirot said quietly. "Yes." Lady Ashworth's fingers tightened in her lap. "With a curtain cord. The police said death occurred sometime around midnight." "And Thomas Harding? Where was he during the evening?" "Thomas was not present at dinner. He rarely was. Roland preferred to keep staff and social occasions separate. But he was in the house, attending to various duties. I believe he was working in the small office adjacent to the study for much of the evening." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Lady Ashworth, what was your impression of Harding? Before the murder, I mean. What sort of man was he?" For the first time, something flickered in Lady Ashworth's composed expression, a shadow that passed too quickly for me to identify. Thomas was exemplary, she said carefully. Dedicated, efficient, entirely devoted to his work. Roland relied upon him absolutely. I believe he had come to regard Thomas almost as, she hesitated, almost as a son. And your daughter, Miss Ashworth, did she share this high opinion of Mr. Harding? The shadow returned, deeper this time. Lady Ashworth's gaze dropped to her hands. My daughter. Eleanor has been deeply affected by these events. She has not been well. She is at home? She is in her room. She rarely leaves it these days. Lady Ashworth looked up, and I saw a fierce protectiveness kindle in her eyes. I must ask, Mr. Poirot, that you do not disturb her. She has suffered enough. Of course, madame. I have no wish to cause unnecessary distress. Poirot's voice was gentle, but I caught the sharpness of his gaze as he studied Lady Ashworth's reaction. However, I should very much like to see the study where the murder occurred. If it is not too great an imposition? Lady Ashworth rose, her composure restored. I will have Fenwick show you. The room has been preserved, more or less. I found I could not bear to change it, yet I could not bear to enter it either. She summoned the butler, who led us through a series of corridors to the east wing of the house. The study was at the end, a heavy oak door, now slightly ajar. This is how it was found, sir, Fenwick said, pushing the door open. The master inside, the door unlocked. No sign of forced entry. Poirot stepped into the room, and I followed. Sir Roland Ashworth's study was a monument to masculine authority. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, broken only by tall bookshelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, positioned to face both the door and the window that overlooked the rear gardens. Heavy curtains, green velvet, I noted, framed the window. The curtains, I said. The cord came from there? No, Hastings. Poirot moved to the window, examining the curtain ties. That is what Harding confessed. But the evidence proved otherwise. These cords are intact, you see? The murder weapon came from elsewhere. The library, Fenwick offered from the doorway. The police determined that the cord was from the library window on the floor above. Curious. Poirot's fingers traced the velvet curtains thoughtfully. A killer who takes the time to fetch a cord from another room, rather than using what is readily at hand. This suggests premeditation, non? The murder was planned. I examined the desk while Poirot prowled the perimeter of the room. Papers were still scattered across its surface. Correspondence, business documents, what appeared to be a half-written letter. This letter, I said, picking it up carefully. It's dated May 14th, the day of the murder. He was writing to someone named Thornbury. Something about a business arrangement. Poirot appeared at my elbow, taking the letter with delicate fingers. His eyes scanned the contents rapidly. A dissolution of partnership, he murmured. Sir Roland was ending a business relationship with this Thornbury, and not amicably, it would seem. There is mention of legal action, of consequences should terms not be met. A motive? Perhaps. Poirot set the letter aside and moved to the window. But let us not leap to conclusions. The world is full of men with grudges against wealthy industrialists. The question is which one entered this room on the night of May 14th. He stood before the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked gardens. From this vantage point, I could see a stone terrace, a lawn descending toward a distant tree line, and, closer to the house, a door that appeared to lead to a servant's passage. That door, Poirot said, pointing. Where does it lead? To the servants' corridor, sir, Fenwick replied. It connects the kitchen, the pantry, and several staff quarters. Mr. Harding's office opens onto that corridor as well. And the garden beyond? How does one access it from inside the house? Through the servants' entrance, sir, just past the kitchen. Poirot nodded slowly. So someone wishing to reach the garden from the study would need to traverse this corridor, past the servants' areas, and exit through the rear. A route that would be observed by staff, unless one knew when the corridor would be empty. The staff were occupied with the dinner party until late, I offered. They might not have noticed someone slipping through. Précisément. Poirot turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. Now, Fenwick, I must ask you some questions of a delicate nature. On the night of the murder, did you observe anything unusual? Any person who seemed out of place? Any conversation that struck you as odd? Fenwick's weathered face remained impassive. I observed nothing unusual, sir. The evening proceeded as all such evenings did. And the guests, who were they? Business associates, as Lady Ashworth mentioned. Mr. Jonathan Thornbury was among them, the gentleman mentioned in that letter. Also Mr. and Mrs. Pemberton, Sir Roland's banker and his wife, Mr. Harold Finch, a solicitor, Dr. Reginald Marsh, the family physician. Ah, Poirot raised one finger. Dr. Marsh was a guest at dinner? Yes, sir. He and Sir Roland had been friends for many years. And yet Thomas Harding mentioned seeing Dr. Marsh in the corridor near the study earlier that evening. Before dinner, he said the doctor seemed agitated and left without speaking. Fenwick's composure flickered, a brief tightening around the eyes that most would have missed. But Poirot, I knew, missed nothing. I would not know about that, sir. I was occupied with preparations for dinner. Of course. Poirot smiled pleasantly. One more question, Fenwick. The sherry that was served to the staff after dinner, who prepared it? I did, sir, as I always do. And who served it? Again, that almost imperceptible hesitation. I carried the tray to the servants' hall myself, sir. The staff helped themselves. Including Mr. Harding? Yes, sir. He took a glass. Did anyone else handle his glass specifically? Hand it to him, perhaps, or refill it? Fenwick's face had gone very still. I couldn't say, sir. It was a busy evening. I did not observe every interaction. Poirot nodded, his expression betraying nothing. Thank you, Fenwick. You have been most helpful. The butler withdrew, and Poirot immediately crossed to the desk, where he began a systematic examination of its contents. I watched him open drawers, rifle through papers, and examine objects with the meticulous attention that characterized all his investigations. You suspect the butler? I asked in a low voice. I suspect everyone, Hastings. That is my profession. Poirot paused, holding up a small brass key. But consider, the sherry. Harding told us he drank sherry after dinner and remembers nothing afterward. Someone drugged that sherry, or drugged Harding's glass specifically. Fenwick prepared and served it. But why would Fenwick want to frame Harding for murder? That is the question, is it not? Poirot pocketed the key and continued his search. Unless Fenwick was acting on someone else's behalf, a loyal servant who follows orders without question. He trailed off, his attention caught by something in the bottom drawer of the desk. With great care, he extracted a leather-bound book, a diary by the look of it. Sir Roland's personal journal, Poirot murmured, opening it to the final entries. His eyes scanned the pages rapidly, and I saw his expression change, a subtle shift from curiosity to something darker. Ah, mon Dieu. What is it? Poirot did not answer immediately. He read in silence for a long moment, then closed the diary with a soft snap. It would seem, Hastings, that Sir Roland Ashworth made a discovery in the weeks before his death, a discovery that disturbed him greatly. Poirot's voice was grave. He writes of suspicions, of evidence gathered, of a confrontation he intended to have on the very night he was killed. A confrontation with whom? That he does not say directly. But there are references, veiled but unmistakable, to betrayal within his own household, to deception by those he trusted most. Poirot looked up, meeting my eyes. And to his intention to change his will. The implications hung in the air between us. He was going to disinherit someone, I said slowly, and that someone killed him to prevent it. Perhaps. Poirot slipped the diary into his coat. But there is something else, Hastings. Something that troubles me greatly. He moved to the study door, pausing with his hand on the frame. The night of the murder, according to all accounts, the study door was unlocked when Sir Roland's body was found. Yet Sir Roland was famously protective of his privacy. Fenwick himself mentioned that the master always locked his study when working late. Someone unlocked it after killing him? Or Sir Roland opened it himself, because he knew his visitor, because he trusted them? Poirot's eyes glittered in the dim light of the corridor. Think, Hastings. A killer who plans carefully, who fetches a cord from another room, who drugs an innocent man and plants evidence upon him? Such a person does not break down doors. They are invited in. A member of the household, then. Or a trusted friend. Exactly. Poirot began walking toward the main hall, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. We must speak with the others. The daughter, the doctor, the business associates. Someone in this house knows the truth, and with only 11 days remaining, we must find them. As we passed through the entrance hall, a movement on the grand staircase caught my eye. I looked up and saw a young woman standing on the landing, pale, dark-haired, watching us with an intensity that made me distinctly uncomfortable. She could not have been more than 25, slender and delicate, with her mother's grey eyes. But where Lady Ashworth's gaze held weariness, this young woman's held something else entirely. Fear, I thought. Or perhaps desperation. Miss Ashworth, I presume, Poirot said, bowing slightly. Eleanor Ashworth did not acknowledge the greeting. Her eyes remained fixed on Poirot, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You're trying to save him. Thomas. I am trying to find the truth, mademoiselle. The truth. A bitter smile crossed her lips. The truth is what killed my father, Mr. Poirot, and if you keep digging, it will kill again. Before either of us could respond, she turned and fled up the stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the upper floor. Poirot stared after her, his expression unreadable. The plot, he murmured. It thickens considerably. Chapter 4. Voices from the Past. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle by the time we departed Thornwood House, but my thoughts remained as turbulent as the morning storm. Eleanor Ashworth's cryptic warning echoed in my mind as our cab wound its way back toward London. Poirot, I said at last, unable to contain my curiosity further, what did you make of Miss Ashworth's words? She seemed terrified. She is terrified, Hastings, but of what, or whom? That is the question. Poirot sat with his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in that attitude of intense concentration I knew so well. She knows something. Perhaps she knows everything, and she is torn between the desire to protect and the weight of guilt. You think she's involved in the murder? I think she is involved in Thomas Harding's confession. Poirot's eyes opened, fixing me with their dark intensity. Consider, mon ami, Harding wrote a name in that notebook, the name of the person who convinced him to confess. He spoke of love, of sacrifice, of protecting someone dear to him. And now, we meet a young woman who is unwell, who rarely leaves her room, who watches us with desperation in her eyes. The implication struck me with sudden force. Eleanor Ashworth? She's the one who convinced Harding to confess? I believe so, yes. But why? If she loved him, and clearly she must have, for him to sacrifice himself so completely, why would she want him to hang for a crime he didn't commit? Because, Hastings, she believed he did commit it. Poirot's voice was grave. Remember what Harding told us. He woke in the garden with blood on his cuffs and the murder weapon in his pocket. When Eleanor found him, and I believe she did find him before the police arrived, she saw the evidence and drew the natural conclusion. Her beloved had killed her father. Good God! I sat back against the cab's leather seat, struggling to absorb this. So she convinced him to confess, thinking she was helping him avoid a worse fate, but she didn't know he was innocent. Précisément. She believed she was showing mercy, a quick confession, a dignified end, rather than a protracted trial that would expose their relationship and drag the family name through scandal. Poirot shook his head slowly. It is a tragedy of errors, Hastings. Two people who loved each other, each trying to protect the other, and neither knowing the truth. Then Eleanor isn't the killer. No, she is a victim of this crime as surely as her father, and as surely as Harding himself. The true killer understood human nature with terrible precision. They knew that Eleanor loved Harding. They knew she would find him in the garden, see the evidence, and draw the wrong conclusion. They counted on her love to complete their frame. The cab rattled over cobblestones as we entered London proper. Through the window, I watched the grey streets slide past, my mind wrestling with the implications. "We need to speak with Dr. Marsh," I said. "He was behaving suspiciously that night." "Indeed, and with Monsieur Thornbury, whose business relationship with Sir Roland was ending most acrimoniously." Poirot consulted his pocket watch. "It is past noon. I suggest we take luncheon at my flat, review what we have learned, and then divide our efforts. You, Hastings, will call upon Jonathan Thornbury at his offices in the city. I shall pay a visit to the good doctor. Divide and conquer? Divide and observe." Poirot permitted himself a small smile. "Two pairs of eyes see more than one, and we have precious little time for sequential investigation." The offices of Thornbury and Associates occupied the third floor of a respectable building in Threadneedle Street. I presented my card to a young clerk and was shown, after some delay, into the presence of Jonathan Thornbury himself. He was a man of perhaps 55, heavy-set, with the florid complexion of one who enjoyed his port rather too liberally. His office was handsomely appointed, but I noticed, with skills honed by years at Poirot's side, certain signs of strain. Papers stacked haphazardly, an inkwell that had not been properly cleaned, a general air of disorder that spoke of a business under pressure. "Captain Hastings." Thornbury rose from behind his desk, extending a meaty hand. "I confess your card intrigued me. An associate of the famous Hercule Poirot, investigating the Ashworth murder? I thought that matter was settled." "New evidence has come to light, Mr. Thornbury. The Home Office has asked Mr. Poirot to review the case." Thornbury's expression flickered, a momentary tightening around the eyes that he quickly masked with heartiness. Well, do sit down, Captain. I'm happy to assist in any way I can. Roland Ashworth was a friend of many years, whatever our recent difficulties. I understand those difficulties were considerable." I took the offered chair, watching Thornbury's reaction carefully. "Sir Roland was dissolving your business partnership, was he not?" "He was." Thornbury's voice hardened slightly. "And he was doing so in a manner that I considered distinctly unfair. Roland always did have a ruthless streak. Brilliant businessman, but utterly without sentiment when it came to money. The letter we found suggested legal action was contemplated. Threats, even." "Threats?" Thornbury's face reddened. "See here, Captain, I don't care for your implications. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I told Roland I would see him in court if he persisted in his unconscionable behavior, but I certainly didn't kill him over it." "Where were you at midnight on the night of May 14th? "At Thornwood House, of course. I was a dinner guest. I departed around 10:30 with the Pembertons. We shared a cab back to London. You may verify that with Mrs. Pemberton if you wish." I made a note. "And during the dinner itself? Did you observe anything unusual? Any tension between Sir Roland and other guests?" Thornbury leaned back in his chair, his initial defensiveness giving way to something more thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, there was something. Roland was distracted all evening, not himself at all, kept glancing at the clock as if waiting for something, and he excused himself earlier than usual, claiming correspondence to attend to. Did he speak privately with anyone during the evening?" "He had a brief word with Dr. Marsh before dinner, in the hallway, away from the other guests. I didn't hear what was said, but Roland looked troubled afterward." "Troubled in what way?" "Angry, I should say, or perhaps worried. He had that look he got when a business deal was going sour, tight-lipped, eyes hard." Thornbury shrugged. "But Roland was often in that mood." I thought nothing of it at the time. I pursued several more lines of questioning, but Thornbury had little else of substance to offer. His alibi appeared solid. Departure at 10:30, shared transport with witnesses, and while he clearly had motive, the timeline seemed to exclude him from the actual murder. As I rose to leave, a thought struck me. "Mr. Thornbury, you mentioned that you and Sir Roland had been friends for many years. Did you know his family well? his wife, his daughter. Cordelia, Lady Ashworth, is a fine woman. Too good for Roland, if you want my honest opinion. She put up with a great deal over the years. Thornbury's voice softened. As for Eleanor, a sweet girl, but fragile. Took after her mother in temperament. I always thought Roland was too hard on her. In what way? Expected her to marry well, produce heirs, continue the dynasty, the usual paternal tyranny of wealthy men. Thornbury shook his head. But Eleanor had other ideas, I gathered. There were rumors of a romantic attachment, someone unsuitable. Thomas Harding? Thornbury's eyebrows rose. You know about that? Yes, the secretary. Roland was furious when he discovered it, threatened to disinherit Eleanor entirely if she didn't break off the relationship. That was perhaps a month before his death. This was new information, and potentially vital. I thanked Thornbury for his time and departed, my mind racing with possibilities. We reconvened at Poirot's flat as evening fell, the November darkness pressing against the windows like a living thing. Over coffee and Petit's fours, we shared what we had learned. Thornbury's alibi is solid, I reported. He left Thornwood House at 10:30 with the Pembertons. Unless the medical evidence about the time of death is completely wrong, he couldn't have killed Sir Roland. The medical evidence is not wrong, Poirot said. I have confirmed it with my own sources. Death occurred between 11 o'clock and 1 in the morning, most likely around midnight. He set down his coffee cup with precise care. But your visit was not without value, Hastings. This information about Sir Roland's discovery of Eleanor's relationship with Harding, it is most significant. How so? Consider the sequence of events. 1 month before the murder, Sir Roland discovers that his daughter is romantically involved with his secretary. He is furious. He threatens disinheritance. Poirot began to pace, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. Now, in his diary, Sir Roland writes of betrayal within the household, of a confrontation he intended to have that very night, of changing his will. What if the betrayal he discovered was not merely the romance, but something more? Such as? That I do not yet know, but there is another piece to this puzzle. Poirot stopped by the fireplace, his expression grave. I paid my visit to Dr. Reginald Marsh this afternoon. It was most illuminating. What did he say? At first, nothing of use. He claimed his visit to Thornwood House on the day of the murder was purely social. He had stopped by to check on Lady Ashworth, who had been suffering from headaches. A plausible explanation, but one that did not account for his agitation when Harding saw him leaving Sir Roland's study. Poirot moved to his desk and retrieved a small glass vial from his pocket, holding it up to the lamplight. I took the liberty of examining Dr. Marsh's medical bag while he was called away to the telephone. Inside, I found this. The vial contained a clear liquid, colorless and unremarkable. What is it? Chloral hydrate, Hastings. A sedative, commonly used to treat insomnia, but also known by another name, knockout drops. Poirot's voice was hard. Administered in sufficient quantity, mixed into a drink, it would render a man unconscious within 30 minutes and leave him with no memory of the hours preceding his collapse. Good Lord, I stared at the vial. You think Dr. Marsh drugged Harding? I am certain of it. The question is why, and on whose behalf? Could Marsh be the murderer? It is possible, but I think not. Dr. Marsh has no obvious motive for killing Sir Roland. They were friends of long standing. There is no financial connection, no hint of animosity. Poirot replaced the vial in his pocket. No, I believe Dr. Marsh administered the drug on someone else's instructions. He is a tool, not a mastermind. But whose tool? Poirot was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful, almost musing. Let us consider the evidence as a whole, Hastings. Sir Roland discovers his daughter's relationship with Harding. He threatens disinheritance. He writes in his diary of betrayal and confrontation. On the night of his death, he has a private conversation with Dr. Marsh that leaves him angry or worried. Later that evening, Harding is drugged, rendered unconscious, and placed in the garden with incriminating evidence on his person. Sir Roland is murdered, strangled with a cord fetched from another room, suggesting premeditation. The study door is unlocked, indicating the killer was trusted. Eleanor finds Harding, believes him guilty, and convinces him to confess. A perfect frame. "It's diabolical," I said. "But who could have orchestrated all of this?" "Someone who knew the household intimately. Someone who knew of Eleanor's relationship with Harding and could predict how she would react. Someone who could command the obedience of Dr. Marsh, and perhaps of Fenwick, the butler, as well. Someone who stood to gain from Sir Roland's death before the will could be changed." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You don't mean—" "I mean nothing yet, Hastings. I theorize, I speculate, I arrange the facts into patterns. But there is one more voice I must hear before the picture becomes clear." Poirot moved to his desk and began composing a note with swift, precise strokes. "Tomorrow, we return to Thornwood House. I must speak with Eleanor Ashworth, alone, if possible, and I must examine the library where the murder weapon originated. Do you think Eleanor will speak to you?" "I think she wants to speak to someone, desperately. She's carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear. She warned us that the truth would kill again. I believe she knows more than she has admitted, perhaps more than she realizes she knows." Poirot sealed the note and rang for his landlady. "This is to be delivered to Thornwood House tonight," he instructed. "By messenger, marked urgent." When the landlady had departed, Poirot turned back to me, his expression somber. 10 days remain, Hastings. 10 days until an innocent man faces the hangman's noose. We have learned much, but the crucial piece, the identity of the true killer, remains hidden. Do you have a theory?" "I have several theories, each more distasteful than the last." Poirot moved to the window, gazing out at the dark London streets. "But theories are not proof, and without proof, Thomas Harding will die for a crime he did not commit." He stood in silence for a long moment. His profile illuminated by the gaslight, the waxed points of his mustache casting small shadows on his cheeks. "There is something else that troubles me, Hastings. Something in the pattern that does not quite fit." "What?" "The cord." Poirot turned to face me. Why fetch a cord from the library when identical cords hung in the study itself? A killer in the grip of passion might use whatever is at hand. A premeditated killer might bring their own weapon. But to leave the study, climb to the library, detach a curtain cord, and return, this suggests something else entirely. What does it suggest? That the killer wished us to know the crime was planned, that they wanted the library to be connected to the murder somehow. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or perhaps that the murder did not occur in the study at all. Not in the study. But that's where the body was found. Indeed, where the body was found. Poirot's voice dropped. But what if Sir Roland was killed elsewhere and moved to the study afterward? What if the crime scene itself is a fabrication, another layer of the frame? I stared at him, my mind reeling. But why? What would be the purpose? To hide something, Hastings, to conceal evidence that would reveal the killer's identity, to create a narrative that pointed away from the truth. Poirot's voice hardened with determination. Tomorrow we examine the library. If my suspicions are correct, we will find what others have overlooked. He reached for his coat, preparing to retire for the evening. Rest well, Hastings. Tomorrow we confront the darkness at the heart of Thornwood House. And I fear that what we discover will be more terrible than either of us imagines. Chapter 5. The True Confession. The morning of our return to Thornwood House dawned clear and cold, the previous day's rain having given way to a brittle November frost. As our cab traversed the familiar winding drive, I noted that the estate looked different in sunlight, no less imposing, but somehow more exposed, its secrets laid bare beneath the pale winter sky. Fenwick admitted us with his customary reserve, though I fancied I detected a new tension in his bearing. Lady Ashworth is indisposed this morning, he informed us. She asks that you conduct your investigation without disturbing her. And Miss Ashworth? Poirot inquired. Miss Eleanor has agreed to receive you in the morning room, sir. She read your note. Excellent. Poirot handed the butler his hat and coat with meticulous care. "But first, Fenwick, I should like to examine the library, the room from which the murder weapon was taken. You will show us the way, s'il vous plaît." Something flickered in the butler's eyes. Alarm, perhaps, or resignation, but he inclined his head in acquiescence. "Very good, sir. This way." The library occupied the first floor of the east wing, directly above Sir Roland's study. It was a handsome room, lined with books from floor to ceiling, furnished with leather armchairs and reading tables. Heavy green curtains, identical to those in the study below, framed 3 tall windows overlooking the rear gardens. Poirot moved immediately to the windows, examining each in turn. At the third window he stopped. "Here," he said softly. "This is where the cord was taken." I joined him and saw what he had observed. The curtain tie on the right side of the window was newer than its counterpart on the left, the fabric slightly brighter, the braiding less worn. "Replaced after the murder," I said. "Indeed. The police took the original as evidence, and the household obtained a replacement." Poirot crouched, examining the floor beneath the window with intense concentration. "But they did not think to examine what else might have occurred in this room on the night of the murder?" He produced a magnifying glass from his pocket and began a systematic examination of the carpet. I watched in silence, knowing better than to interrupt when Poirot was in this mode of focused investigation. After several minutes, he straightened with a small grunt of satisfaction. "There." He pointed to a section of carpet near the window. "Do you see it, Hastings?" I peered at the indicated spot. The carpet was dark burgundy, patterned with an intricate design that made any irregularity difficult to detect. But as I looked closer, I saw what Poirot had found: a faint discoloration, a shadow within the pattern that did not quite match its surroundings. A stain. A stain that someone attempted to clean, but not entirely successfully. Poirot's voice was grim. "And here, observe the positioning. Near the window, but also near this reading chair. A person might have been sitting here, or standing, when—" He stopped abruptly, his head tilting like a hunting dog catching a scent. "Fenwick," he said without turning, "you may leave us. I shall ring when we require assistance." The butler, who had been hovering near the door, hesitated for a fraction of a second before withdrawing. When the door had closed behind him, Poirot moved swiftly to examine the reading chair itself. "Look here, Hastings." He indicated the wooden arm of the chair. "Scratches, fresh ones, within the past year. See how the varnish has not yet oxidized to match the surrounding surface. And here, on the back of the chair—" He lifted the cushion, revealing the upholstery beneath. A small tear in the fabric, barely visible, caught my eye. "Someone gripped this chair with great force," Poirot murmured. "Clawed at it, perhaps, in a struggle. And the stain on the carpet. It is not wine, Hastings. It is blood." "Blood, but the murder occurred in the study." "So we were meant to believe." Poirot replaced the cushion with care. "But consider, Sir Roland wrote in his diary that he intended a confrontation that night. What if that confrontation occurred here, in the library, rather than in the study? What if he came upon someone unexpectedly, or was lured here for a private conversation, and was killed here instead of downstairs?" "Précisément." "The body was then moved to the study, arranged to appear as though the murder had occurred there. The cord was taken from this window because it was already here, because it was the murder weapon used in this very room." I stared at the faded stain, the scratched chair, seeing them with new eyes. But why go to such trouble? Why move the body at all? "Because of what is in this room, Hastings, or rather, what was in this room." Poirot moved to the bookshelves, scanning the titles with rapid eyes. "The library contains more than books. It contains the family's private papers, documents, correspondence, records of all kinds." He stopped before a section of shelving that appeared slightly different from its neighbors, the books less dusty, more recently handled. "Here, someone has been through these papers, and recently. Within the past 6 months, I would say." Poirot began removing volumes, examining them briefly before setting them aside. "Ah, What have we here?" From behind a row of leather-bound classics, he withdrew a wooden box, small, ornate, fitted with a brass lock. The lock had been forced. The brass was bent and scratched. "Someone has broken into this box," Poirot observed. "The question is, what did they find inside?" He opened the lid. The box was empty, but not entirely. At the bottom lay a single sheet of paper, folded and yellowed with age. Poirot unfolded it with delicate fingers. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to something I could not quite identify, a complex emotion that combined satisfaction with profound sadness. "Mon Dieu," he breathed. "At last. The truth." "What is it?" Poirot looked up, meeting my eyes with unusual gravity. "It is a birth certificate, Hastings, dated 32 years ago, for a child named Thomas, born to a woman named Margaret Harding, and a father whose name has been left blank." He paused. "But there is a notation in the margin, added later, in a different hand. It reads, 'Father, Roland Ashworth, settlement paid, acknowledgement forbidden.'" The implications crashed over me like a wave. Thomas Harding is Sir Roland's son? His illegitimate son, yes. Born of an affair with a woman named Margaret Harding, a servant in the household, I would surmise, or perhaps a village girl. Sir Roland paid for the child's upkeep, but forbade any public acknowledgement of the relationship. Poirot's voice was heavy. Thomas was raised believing himself an orphan, taken into service at Thornwood House, eventually becoming secretary to his own father, a father who never acknowledged him. But did Harding know? Did he know he was Sir Roland's son? I think not at first. But someone discovered this secret. Someone found this box, this certificate, and understood its implications. Poirot held up the document. Sir Roland wrote in his diary of betrayal within the household. What if the betrayal he discovered was not Eleanor's romance with Harding, but rather that someone had uncovered this secret and was using it against him? Blackmail? Perhaps. Or perhaps something simpler. The desire for recognition, for inheritance, for what Thomas Harding believed was rightfully his. Poirot shook his head slowly. But no, that does not fit with what we know of Harding. He is not a man consumed by greed or ambition. He is a man who sacrificed himself for love. Then who found this certificate? Who used this information? That, mon ami, is what we must now discover. Poirot carefully pocketed the birth certificate. Come, Miss Ashworth awaits us, and I believe she holds the final piece of this tragic puzzle. Eleanor Ashworth received us in the morning room, a small but pleasant chamber with windows facing the frost-silvered garden. She sat in a chair by the fire, wrapped in a shawl despite the room's warmth, her pale face bearing the marks of sleepless nights and private anguish. "Mr. Poirot," she said as we entered, "your note said you knew the truth. Is that really so?" "I know a great deal of it, mademoiselle." Poirot seated himself opposite her, his manner gentle but intent. "But there are gaps that only you can fill. Will you help me?" Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I should." "Thomas Harding will die in 9 days unless the truth is told? Is that what you wish?" "No." The word burst from her with desperate force. "No, I never wanted. I thought I was helping him. I thought he had done it, and I was trying to spare him the worst of it. The scandal, the exposure of our relationship, the—" She broke off, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. "You loved him," Poirot said softly. "You still love him." "Yes." The admission came as barely a whisper. "We were going to be married, in secret, if necessary. Father would never have approved, but we didn't care. Thomas was everything to me. And when you found him in the garden that night, with blood on his clothes and the cord in his pocket, you believed he had killed your father." Eleanor nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I found him just before dawn. He was unconscious, sprawled on the grass near the servants' entrance. When I saw the blood, the cord, I panicked. I woke him, and he couldn't remember anything. He didn't even know where he was. I thought he had done something terrible, and his mind had simply blocked it out. So You convinced him to confess. I told him the evidence was overwhelming. That he would hang regardless of what he said. But if he confessed, admitted his guilt, it might go easier. The judge might show mercy. Eleanor's voice cracked. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. They showed no mercy at all. And the details of the confession? You provided those as well? Not entirely. Eleanor's eyes dropped. I knew father had been strangled. Fenwick told me that much when he discovered the body, but the specifics, the cord, the timing, the method, I didn't know those things. Someone told me what Thomas should say. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes sharp as blades. Who, mademoiselle? Who told you how to construct the confession? Eleanor's face contorted with anguish. I can't. Please don't ask me. I must ask you, because I already know the answer. Poirot's voice was inexorable. It was your mother, was it not? Lady Ashworth told you what details to feed to Thomas Harding. She guided the confession from the shadows, ensuring that the wrong man would take the blame for a crime she herself had committed. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor stared at Poirot with wide, horrified eyes, and I saw the truth written in her expression before she spoke a word. How did you know? Because there is no other possibility that fits the facts. Poirot rose and moved to the fireplace, his back to us for a moment before he turned to face Eleanor once more. Lady Ashworth is the only person in this household with the power to command Dr. Marsh and Fenwick alike. She is the one who stood to lose everything if Sir Roland changed his will. Not merely money, but control, position, the very foundations of her existence. And she is the one who knew about Thomas Harding's true parentage. Eleanor gasped. You know about that. I found the birth certificate in the library, the room where your father was actually killed, not the study where his body was discovered. Poirot's voice hardened. Your mother found that certificate as well. Perhaps she had known for years. Perhaps she discovered it only recently. But she understood its implications. If Thomas Harding was Sir Roland's illegitimate son, then his relationship with you, his own half-sister, was not merely scandalous, but abhorrent. And if that relationship were ever exposed, the family would be destroyed. Eleanor had gone white as chalk. Half-sister? She whispered. Thomas is my... We are... You did not know? Poirot's expression softened with genuine compassion. No, I see that you did not. Your mother kept this secret even from you, used it to manipulate the situation without revealing the full horror of what she had discovered. Oh, God! Eleanor pressed both hands to her face. Oh, God! Oh, God! Your mother killed Sir Roland in the library that night. I believe he summoned her there to confront her, perhaps about the birth certificate, perhaps about financial matters, perhaps about all of it. They argued. She seized the curtain cord and strangled him. Then she moved his body to the study, arranged the scene, and set about framing Thomas Harding, a man she hated not only for his presumptuous romance with her daughter, but for his very existence as living proof of her husband's infidelity. No, Eleanor shook her head violently. No, Mother wouldn't. She couldn't. She could, mademoiselle. And she did. Poirot's voice was gentle but unyielding. Dr. Marsh drugged Thomas's sherry on her instructions. Fenwick assisted with moving the body and planting the evidence. Your mother then manipulated you, her own daughter, into convincing an innocent man to confess. It was a masterpiece of evil, constructed by a woman who had endured years of loveless marriage to a cold and tyrannical man. But I helped her. Eleanor's voice was barely audible. Without knowing it, I helped her murder Thomas, the man I loved. You were deceived, mademoiselle. You are as much a victim as Thomas Harding himself. Poirot moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur. But there is still time to save him. 9 days remain. If you testify to what you know, if you tell the truth about your mother's guidance of the confession, she's my mother. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. How can I condemn my own mother? How can you let an innocent man die? Poirot countered. A man you love, whatever the nature of your true relationship may be, He sacrificed everything to protect you. Will you not do the same for him?" Eleanor sat in silence for a long moment, her shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. When at last she looked up, her expression had changed. The fear remained, but something else had joined it. Resolution. "I'll do it," she whispered. "I'll testify. God forgive me, I'll tell them everything." Poirot nodded slowly. "Bien. Now there is one thing more you must do for me, mademoiselle." "What?" "Send word to your mother that I wish to see her." All the family, all the staff, assembled in the drawing room at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Poirot's eyes glittered with cold determination. It is time for the truth to be spoken aloud, and for justice, at long last, to be served. Chapter 6. Justice Restored. The drawing room of Thornwood House had never seemed so oppressive. Though the fire burned brightly and the lamps cast their warm glow across the silk wallpaper, a chill pervaded the atmosphere that no flame could dispel. The portrait of Sir Roland Ashworth gazed down from above the mantelpiece, his painted eyes seeming to follow each person who entered, cold, imperious, judging even from beyond the grave. I positioned myself near the door, as was my custom during these climactic gatherings, where I might observe both Poirot and the assembled suspects. My notebook lay open in my hand, though I suspected that what was about to unfold would be etched into my memory far more indelibly than any written record. Lady Ashworth sat in the high-backed chair nearest the fire, her posture rigidly erect, her face a mask of aristocratic composure. She wore black, full mourning now, I noted, rather than the half-mourning purple of our previous visit. Whether this was a calculated choice or merely coincidence, I could not say. Eleanor perched on the settee opposite her mother, pale as death, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that the knuckles showed white. She had not looked at Lady Ashworth since entering the room. Indeed, she seemed unable to look anywhere except at the carpet before her feet. Fenwick stood by the sideboard, his aged face betraying nothing. Beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his evening clothes, was Dr. Reginald Marsh. The doctor mopped his brow repeatedly with a silk handkerchief, his eyes darting toward the door as though calculating the distance to escape. Inspector Graves of Scotland Yard occupied a chair near the window, his expression one of barely concealed skepticism. Sir Geoffrey Blackwell had insisted upon official presence, and Graves, who had led the original investigation, had reluctantly agreed to attend. "I still don't see the purpose of this theatrical display," he muttered to me as Poirot made his entrance. Harding confessed. "The case is closed." "I rather think, Inspector," I replied quietly, "that you may soon revise that opinion." Poirot took his position before the fireplace, directly beneath Sir Roland's portrait. He had dressed with particular care for the occasion, his evening clothes immaculate, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustache waxed to razor-sharp points. He stood in silence for a moment, his dark eyes moving slowly from face to face, and I saw each person react in their own way. Lady Ashworth with haughty disdain, Eleanor with desperate hope, Dr. Marsh with barely concealed terror, Fenwick with stoic resignation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began at last, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "I thank you for gathering here this evening. We are assembled to discuss the murder of Sir Roland Ashworth, a crime for which Thomas Harding was convicted and sentenced to death. A crime to which he confessed in full and terrible detail." He paused, letting the words settle. But Thomas Harding did not kill Sir Roland Ashworth. His confession was false, manufactured, rehearsed, and delivered by a man who believed he had no other choice. In 9 days, an innocent man will hang unless we act. And so tonight I shall reveal the truth. Who truly killed Sir Roland, how the crime was committed, and why an elaborate frame was constructed to destroy a man whose only fault was loving the wrong woman. "This is absurd," Lady Ashworth said coldly. Harding confessed. He knew details that only the killer could know. "Did he, madame?" Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Let us examine those details, shall we?" Harding confessed to strangling Sir Roland from behind. Yet the bruising patterns indicated a frontal attack. He claimed to have used the curtain cord from the study window. Yet forensic analysis proved the cord came from the library. He stated the murder occurred at 10 o'clock, yet medical evidence placed death around midnight. The confusion of a guilty mind, Lady Ashworth said dismissively. Shock distorts memory. Shock distorts memory, yes, but it does not invent entirely false scenarios. Poirot's voice hardened almost imperceptibly. A man who commits murder knows what he has done. The violence of the act sears itself into consciousness. But a man who confesses to a murder he did not commit, he must rely upon what he has been told. And if he is told incorrectly, if his instructor does not know the true details, then his confession will be riddled with errors. Inspector Graves leaned forward, his skepticism beginning to waver. Are you suggesting someone fed Harding a false confession? I am not suggesting it, Inspector. I am stating it as fact. Poirot reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the birth certificate we had found in the library. But before we discuss the confession, we must understand the motive. For this crime was not born of sudden rage or opportunistic greed. It was the culmination of years of resentment, betrayal, and carefully nurtured hatred. He held up the document. This is a birth certificate, dated 32 years ago. It records the birth of a child named Thomas, son of Margaret Harding, father unnamed. But observe this notation in the margin, added in a different hand. Father, Roland Ashworth. Settlement paid, acknowledgement forbidden. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Eleanor pressed her handkerchief to her lips. Dr. Marsh's face went grey, even Fenwick's composure cracked momentarily. Thomas Harding, Poirot continued, is the illegitimate son of Sir Roland Ashworth. Born of an affair with a servant girl, raised in ignorance of his true parentage, eventually employed as secretary to his own father, a father who never acknowledged him, never showed him the slightest paternal affection, yet kept him close for reasons we can only surmise. Guilt, perhaps, or the desire to observe from a distance the son he could never publicly claim. This is a fabrication, Lady Ashworth said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. Where did you obtain this document? From a locked box in your library, madame. A box whose lock had been forced, recently, within the past year. Poirot's gaze fixed upon her with uncomfortable intensity. You knew about this certificate, Lady Ashworth. Perhaps you had known for years, but you discovered something else as well, something that transformed old resentment into murderous intent. I don't know what you're talking about. I am talking about your daughter's relationship with Thomas Harding. Poirot gestured toward Eleanor, who flinched as though struck. A romance that you discovered and that filled you with horror, not merely because Harding was a servant, unsuitable in the eyes of society, but because you knew what Eleanor did not, that Thomas Harding was her half-brother, that the man she loved, the man she intended to marry, shared her own father's blood. Eleanor let out a strangled sob. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Of course you did not, mademoiselle. Your mother kept this secret even from you, used it as a weapon without revealing its full horror? Poirot's voice softened with compassion before hardening once more. But let us return to the sequence of events. Sir Roland also discovered the romance, perhaps through his own observations, perhaps through information provided by a loyal servant. He was furious. He threatened to disinherit Eleanor entirely. That much is common knowledge, Lady Ashworth said. Roland was a tyrannical man who sought to control everyone around him. His threats meant nothing. Ah, but these threats were different, madame, because Sir Roland had also discovered that someone had been searching through his private papers. Someone had found the birth certificate and understood its implications. He wrote in his diary of betrayal within the household, betrayal that went beyond a mere unsuitable romance. Poirot paused. He intended to confront the person responsible on the night of May 14th. He intended to change his will, but he never got the chance. Poirot moved slowly around the room, his footsteps measured and deliberate. On the night of the murder, Sir Roland hosted a dinner party. Among the guests was Dr. Reginald Marsh, a family friend of long standing, a man trusted implicitly by everyone in the household. Poirot stopped before the doctor, who had gone pale as parchment. Dr. Marsh, you arrived early that evening, did you not? Before the other guests? Marsh's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Thomas Harding saw you leaving Sir Roland's study, looking agitated. What passed between you and Sir Roland in that conversation? I don't recall. Allow me to refresh your memory. Poirot's voice cracked like a whip. Sir Roland summoned you early because he had questions about a prescription for chloral hydrate, a sedative commonly used for insomnia, but also capable of rendering a man unconscious when administered in sufficient quantity. Sir Roland had discovered that someone in his household had been obtaining this drug through you. He demanded an explanation. Marsh's composure shattered entirely. He knew about the chloral hydrate. He demanded to know who had asked me to procure it and why. I tried to explain. I told him it was for Lady Ashworth's nerves, that she had been suffering from anxiety. You told him the truth, in other words, that you had been supplying Lady Ashworth with a drug that could be used to incapacitate an unwitting victim. Poirot's eyes blazed, and Sir Roland understood immediately what this meant. His wife was planning something that required a man to be rendered unconscious. He dismissed you from his study, but he had already guessed the truth. That is why he appeared angry or worried for the remainder of the evening. Lady Ashworth rose from her chair, her aristocratic mask beginning to crack. This is speculation, wild, baseless speculation. Is it, madame? Then let us proceed to facts. Poirot turned to address the room at large. After dinner, the staff was served sherry, prepared and distributed by Fenwick. Thomas Harding drank from his glass, and within 30 minutes began to feel drowsy. He remembers nothing after approximately 9 o'clock. He woke in the garden at dawn, with blood on his cuffs and a curtain cord in his pocket. Poirot fixed his gaze upon Fenwick. You drugged his sherry, did you not, Fenwick? On Lady Ashworth's instructions. The butler stood rigid, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. I have served this family for 33 years, he said quietly. I have followed orders without question, because that is what loyalty demands. Lady Ashworth told me the drug would merely help Mr. Harding sleep, that he had been suffering from insomnia and was too proud to admit it. I believed her. Fenwick, be silent, Lady Ashworth commanded. No, my lady, I have been silent too long. The old butler's voice cracked with anguish. When I discovered Mr. Harding in the garden with blood on his clothes, I knew something was terribly wrong. And when you instructed me to help you move Sir Roland's body from the library to the study, he's lying. He's a senile old fool who... The library! Poirot's voice cut through Lady Ashworth's protests like a blade. Yes, let us speak of the library, for that is where Sir Roland was truly killed. Not in his study, as the evidence was arranged to suggest. He produced a small envelope from his pocket. I found traces of blood on the library carpet, madam. Blood that someone attempted to clean, but did not entirely remove. I found scratches on a reading chair where a man clawed desperately at the furniture as the life was choked from him. And I found the empty box that once contained Thomas Harding's birth certificate, proof that the person who committed the murder also possessed the document that revealed Harding's true parentage. Lady Ashworth's face had transformed. The mask of aristocratic composure had fallen away, revealing something raw and terrible beneath, a fury that burned in her eyes like cold fire. You understand nothing, she hissed. Nothing of what I endured. 30 years of marriage to that man, cold, tyrannical, unfaithful. He flaunted his affair with that servant girl, installed his bastard son in my own household, and expected me to tolerate it in silence. And then I discover that my daughter, my Eleanor, has fallen in love with that same bastard, that she intends to marry her own half-brother. Mother, Eleanor whispered. I did what any mother would do. Lady Ashworth's voice rose to a shriek. I protected my daughter from a horror she didn't even understand. Roland intended to reveal the truth, to tell Eleanor about Thomas's parentage and destroy her utterly. He wanted to punish her for defying him, punish me for years of silent resentment. He was going to change his will, leave everything to charitable foundations, cast us both into poverty and disgrace." She stood trembling, her hands clenched at her sides. "So yes, I killed him. I asked him to meet me in the library that night, after the guests had departed. I told him I wanted to negotiate, to find some compromise. But when he laughed at me, when he called me a useless, barren woman who couldn't even produce a suitable heir, something inside me broke. The curtain cord was right there, and I—" She stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I didn't plan it. Not like that. I only meant to frighten him, to make him see reason. But once I started, I couldn't stop. All those years of humiliation, of being treated as nothing more than a broodmare and hostess, it all came pouring out." Poirot nodded slowly, his expression grave. "And afterward, the frame you constructed against Thomas Harding? That was not impulsive." "No." Lady Ashworth's voice had gone flat, drained of emotion. "That was calculated. I knew I couldn't simply leave Roland's body in the library. There was too much evidence. The struggle had knocked books from the shelves, the carpet was stained. So I summoned Fenwick and told him there had been a terrible accident, that Sir Roland had fallen and struck his head. I was hysterical, convincing. He helped me carry the body to the study without asking questions. And Mr. Harding? He was already unconscious in the garden. The chloral hydrate had done its work. It was simple enough to smear blood on his cuffs, slip the cord into his pocket. A ghastly smile crossed Lady Ashworth's lips. I knew Eleanor would find him. I knew she would assume the worst. And I knew that she loved him enough to help him escape the worst consequences. "You manipulated your own daughter," Poirot said quietly. "Used her love as a weapon to condemn an innocent man." "I protected her," Lady Ashworth cried. "Don't you see, if the truth had come out, if Eleanor had learned she was in love with her half-brother, it would have destroyed her. At least this way she could mourn and move on. She could build a new life. Forget Thomas Harding ever existed." Eleanor rose from the settee, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. "You didn't protect me, Mother. You destroyed me. You made me an accomplice to murder without my knowledge. You let the man I loved rot in a prison cell for 6 months, believing he was a killer." Her voice broke. "And you would have let him hang, your own husband's son, rather than face the consequences of what you had done." Lady Ashworth stared at her daughter, and for a moment, just a moment, something like remorse flickered in her eyes. "I did it for you, Eleanor. Everything I did was for you." "No," Eleanor shook her head. "You did it for yourself, for revenge. Father was a cruel man, and perhaps he deserved your hatred, but Thomas didn't deserve to die for your vengeance." Inspector Graves rose from his chair, his face grim. "Lady Cordelia Ashworth, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of Sir Roland Ashworth. Dr. Marsh, Mr. Fenwick, you will be required to make statements regarding your roles in these events. Further charges may follow." As 2 constables entered the room to take Lady Ashworth into custody, she looked at Poirot with an expression of weary defeat. "You're very clever, Mr. Poirot. I underestimated you." "You underestimated the truth, madame. It has a way of emerging, no matter how deeply it is buried." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "I take no pleasure in this. You were wronged by your husband, used and discarded by a man who should have valued you, but you chose to become a wrongdoer in turn, and in doing so, you nearly destroyed the one person you claimed to protect." Lady Ashworth said nothing more. She allowed herself to be led from the room, her head held high, even in defeat, the portrait of her dead husband watching in silent judgment. The paperwork required to halt an execution proved nearly as complex as solving the murder itself. But Sir Geoffrey Blackwell moved with admirable efficiency, and 3 days later, Thomas Harding walked out of Pentonville Prison a free man. Poirot and I were there to meet him. He looked older than when we had first seen him in the condemned cell. Older, and somehow lighter, as though a burden had been lifted that he had not known he was carrying. When he saw Poirot, he extended his hand with quiet dignity. "Mr. Poirot, I don't have the words to thank you." "Words are not necessary, Monsieur Harding. Justice is thanks enough." Poirot shook the offered hand warmly. Though I fear the revelations of this case have brought you pain as well as freedom. Harding nodded slowly. Sir Roland was my father. I've had time to absorb that these past few days. It explains a great deal. Why he hired me, why he watched me so closely, why he could never quite bring himself to treat me as a mere servant. He paused. I don't know whether to mourn him or curse him. Perhaps both, in time. He was a complicated man who made complicated choices. Poirot tilted his head. And Miss Ashworth? You have spoken with her? A shadow crossed Harding's face. She came to see me yesterday. We talked for a long time. He drew a shaky breath. We can never be together now, not as we had planned. She is my sister, but she is also my friend, and I hope we can build something new from the wreckage of what we have lost. That is a good hope, Monsieur Harding. Cling to it. We walked together out of the prison's shadow and into the pale November sunlight. London bustled around us, indifferent to the drama that had just concluded, the saved life, the shattered family, the truth finally spoken after months of silence. What will you do now? I asked Harding. I don't know yet. Find work, I suppose. Start again somewhere no one knows my name or my history. He managed a faint smile. Perhaps I'll go abroad. I've always wanted to see the continent. A fine ambition. Poirot flagged down a passing cab. If you ever find yourself in need of a reference, Monsieur Harding, you may give my name. Hercule Poirot does not forget those he has been privileged to help. Harding's eyes glistened. Thank you, Mr. Poirot, for believing me when no one else would. We parted ways at the corner, Harding walking toward an uncertain but living future, Poirot and I climbing into the cab that would take us back to Faraway Street. As we rattled through the London streets, I found myself reflecting on all that had transpired. A terrible business, I said at last. Indeed, Hastings, a terrible business. Poirot gazed out the window, his expression thoughtful. A woman driven to murder by years of cold cruelty, a man condemned by his own love, a daughter made complicit in her mother's crime without her knowledge, and at the heart of it all, a secret, a birth certificate hidden away in a locked box that set in motion a chain of tragedy spanning generations. Do you think Lady Ashworth truly believed she was protecting Eleanor? I think she convinced herself of that, yes. The human capacity for self-deception is boundless, mon ami. We tell ourselves stories to justify our actions, and in time, we come to believe those stories utterly. Poirot sighed. Lady Ashworth hated her husband and hated his illegitimate son. When she saw a chance to destroy them both while presenting herself as a protective mother, she seized it without hesitation. The protection was real, perhaps, but it was never the primary motive. And now? And now she will face justice. Dr. Marsh and Fenwick will likely receive lesser sentences. They were tools, not architects. Eleanor will have to rebuild her life with the knowledge of what her mother did in her name. Poirot's voice softened. It is not a happy ending, Hastings, but it is a just one. And in this imperfect world, that is sometimes the best we can hope for. We rode in silence for a time, the grey city flowing past our windows. There is one thing I still don't understand, I said eventually. How did you know so quickly that it was Lady Ashworth? What tipped you off? Poirot smiled, a small, weary smile that held more sadness than satisfaction. It was the confession itself, Hastings. The details that Harding recited were wrong, but they were wrong in a very particular way. They described a murder committed by someone who had never killed before, someone who did not understand the mechanics of violence. A frontal attack mistaken for a rear attack, a cord from the wrong room, a time of death that did not match the evidence. He tapped his temple with one finger. The little grey cells, they asked, who would make such errors? Not the true killer, who knew exactly what had happened. Not an outside observer who would have had no details at all. Only someone who had been told about the murder secondhand, someone who had to reconstruct the crime from limited information and got certain things wrong. Lady Ashworth told Eleanor how to construct the confession, I said slowly. But Lady Ashworth herself was working from her own imperfect memory of a crime committed in the heat of passion. Précisément. She remembered strangling her husband. She remembered using a curtain cord. But in the chaos of the moment, she misremembered certain details, or perhaps deliberately altered them to further obscure the truth. Those errors passed through Eleanor to Thomas Harding, and from Harding to the police. The very flaws in the confession pointed directly to its source. "Brilliant," I murmured. "Not brilliant, Hastings, merely observant." Poirot closed his eyes, settling back against the cab's leather seat. "There is no crime so perfect that it does not contain the seeds of its own exposure. The truth wishes to be known. It speaks through the smallest inconsistencies, the tiniest contradictions. One has only to listen." The cab drew to a halt before our lodgings. As we climbed down to the pavement, Poirot paused, looking up at the grey November sky. "You know, Hastings, there is a particular cruelty in what Lady Ashworth did. She used her daughter's love as a weapon, turned Eleanor's devotion into the instrument of an innocent man's destruction. That, perhaps, is the greatest crime of all. Not the murder itself, but the corruption of something pure. And yet Thomas Harding forgives Eleanor, because he understands that she too was a victim. Love, Hastings, is both the noblest and the most dangerous of human emotions. It can inspire the greatest sacrifices, as Harding's willingness to die for Eleanor demonstrates. But it can also be twisted, exploited, made to serve the darkest purposes." Poirot turned toward the door, his silhouette framed against the winter light. "Let us hope, mon ami, that the love which remains between those two broken souls will prove strong enough to heal them. For in the end, that is the only victory that truly matters, not the solving of mysteries, not the punishment of the guilty, but the survival of whatever goodness we can salvage from the wreckage of human folly." He disappeared into the warmth of the house, leaving me alone on the step for a moment. I looked up at the sky, grey, cold, indifferent, and thought of Thomas Harding, walking free through London's streets, beginning the long journey back to a life that had very nearly been stolen from him. Then I followed Poirot inside, closing the door on the November chill. The case was closed. Justice had been served. And somewhere in the city, a condemned man had been given a second chance at life, the rarest and most precious gift of all. And so concludes our tale of guilt, deception, and the redemptive power of truth. Thomas Harding walks free, his name cleared of the murder he did not commit. Lady Ashworth faces the consequences of her terrible choices, and Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells satisfied, returns to await the next puzzle that fate will place before him. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows of Thornwood House. Until next time, dear listeners, remember, the truth is never as simple as it seems, but it is always, always worth pursuing. Good night.